My mum's family and my father lived in this old country home at varying points. It's how they met. My dad was moving out and my grandmother was moving in with all her kids. The house is on top of a mountain in a very rural southwest Virginia. The oral tradition about the mountain, as told by my dad, was that the Native Americans said it was tainted or marked by bad medicine. Sudden weather events were common on the mountain: thunderstorms, snowstorms, hail. Dad rented the house with roommates while in college and told me stories of when he lived there, before he met my mom. He claims that he heard footsteps on the floor when he was home alone. He would often hear footfalls on the stairwell when no one was there. He would hear what sounded like vague or distant conversations. He described it as how it sounded when a phone call bleeds out into another call, just carrying on a conversation. Dad would occasionally see an old man walking with a cane, usually out of the corner of his eye. My mom, before marrying my dad and living in the house with my brother and grandma, would occasionally see figures briefly moving past the windows on the porch outside. My older brother, when he was very little, used to tell my mom about the man who lived in the root cellar. My mom said that was before I was born. My brother was afraid to play outside alone. After I was born, my mom once left me in the crib upstairs, when after a time she heard me wailing, like I was in pain. The crying abruptly stopped when she entered the room and found me sound asleep. One of my parents heard an old wind-up style record player spontaneously start playing music. My mom and dad encountered an amorphous, shimmering but kind of transparent cloud in the middle of the bedroom once. It stuck around for a few seconds and dissipated. I have a few personal experiences of my own, but as I get older, the actual events seem fuzzier and more vague. As a preteen, me and some of my cousins were playing what we called roof ball. We threw a ball on the tin roof and scrambled to catch it when it rolled off. On one throw, there was a pale face perfectly framed in the attic window. A cousin and I were once playing in the woods behind the house. My cousin was leading us through the trees, when I heard heavy and fast footfalls right behind me, like someone was running up on us. When I spun around, the sound abruptly stopped, and there was nothing there. My mom's sister and I flew in from out of state to spend Christmas with the family when I was a teenager. I stayed in the smallest bedroom upstairs and woke up to motion across the room. It looked like some kind of slinking in the closet. A very brief thing. Stayed on a pull-out bed in the same room as my mom and sister for the rest of the trip. The house was neat, very old, even when my parents were young. It was purchased by a preservation society when I was a young adult, where the house was returned to its original condition. I think it's a wedding or event venue now. But to my family, it was always just an old Appalachian country house. First, some background info. This happened about 4 years ago in a house where I lived with my mom and my brother. My mom and my brother still live there. An old couple died in this house before we moved in. There's a small basement which me and my dad decorated, so it's my extra room, if that makes sense. The basement has a separate door from the outside. One day I was chilling in the basement with my friend watching some movies. We were home alone. My mum was at work until 8 p.m. We told her to bring us some snacks when she comes back. It was about 8:15 when we heard the main door of the house opening, steps going from the living room to the kitchen, chairs moving, etc. Normal noise you hear when someone is upstairs. We both heard it and I was like, my mom came home, and he said, yeah, I hear it. Snacks are here. A few minutes later, my phone rings. It's my mom. I was like, okay, probably she's calling so we get the snacks. I answer and she says, I'm stuck at work. I'll be home by 10. Problem with security. I was speechless. I looked at my friend and he was shaking. He heard my mom through the phone. I had one key to the house. My mom had the other. My brother was at grandma's place. Nobody else had a key. There were only 2 keys. So we went upstairs to the main door. It was locked, lights out. I opened and we searched the house. Nothing weird, just as we left it. There were no chairs moved, even though both of us heard them moving. It gives me chills even thinking about it. I heard a lot of steps and movement upstairs when I was alone in the basement, but didn't think much of it. since only I heard it. But since my friend heard it too, I'm starting to think that everything else I heard was also true, and not just my imagination. This story takes place when I was in 6th grade. I'm 21 now. I lived with my mum and my brother in a small but pretty house. When you enter the house, you have a small place to leave your shoes, then big wooden door to slide to enter the living room. On the left is a hallway. When you enter the hallway on the right is a kitchen, and on the left the bathroom. At the end of the hallway there are 2 bedrooms. My mother's is on the right, and mine, which I shared with my brother, on the left. The living room floor and hallway floor is from a different material. The living room floor is more squeaky. This is important to the story. It was early in the morning. My mom went to work and she drove my brother to school. I also had school, but mine started like 30 minutes later than my brother's, so I stayed at home and watched cartoons. I was laying in bed with the doors open. The doors were behind me. As I'm watching TV, I heard Mom's bedroom door opening. It was very loud, like someone was in a hurry. Then footsteps in the hallway going to the living room. I could hear when footsteps got to the living room since the floor began to squeak. Then the big wooden door sliding. And after that, nothing. Silence. I was terrified. I was in the fetal position on my bed looking for my phone in my bed sheets. Once I found it, I texted my mom, "Someone is in the house." She responded, "Are you joking?" I said, "No. Come fast, I'm scared." She sent the neighbour to check on me. The main door and the big wooden doors were closed, but my mom's door was wide open. I still don't know what happened. If this was the only occurrence, I wouldn't even care, but something is definitely in that house. I used to live with my mom, brother, and our pets in a small house around 2017. This house had the presence of 4 spirits, according to my older sister, who can see and feel them. One of the spirits was a young boy, around 7 to 9 years old. The second was a woman. She appeared to my sister without a shirt on. According to my sister, she died very suddenly as she was changing. The third was a young man. My sister didn't know much about him other than the fact that he was a little bit of a prankster. The last one she didn't know much about. It was very hard to read, but very dark. Now, to the incident. I want to preface this with a couple things, as it will rule out potential questions after the fact. I mentioned previously we had pets. This is important because this story involves my old dog. To paint a word picture, he was very energetic, yellow, Labrador, a little over a year old. Now, my dog had intense separation anxiety, so whenever I'd leave the house, I left him in the living room or the hallway outside my room, lock the bedroom door. I didn't want him getting into pot paraphernalia, and I'd leave through my window to kind of confuse him. Yes, it's weird, I know, but his area was right next to the front door. Also, I mentioned previously I lived with my mom and brother, and I'd like to point out at the time of this incident, neither of them were home, and my brother swears he had nothing to do with it. Now that that's out of the way, one day I had left to go do something. Fast forward a couple hours and the front door is locked, so I decided to climb back in through my window, and I noticed something weird right off the bat. I have curtains in my window, and right before I climbed in, I could tell that they had been pulled on. I climb into my room and I'm absolutely floored. My entire room is destroyed, and my dog's just sitting there. The door's closed. Also, there's this insanely uncomforting energy as I angrily shoo my dog out of the room. Now, I find this weird for multiple reasons. One, my dog was just sitting there. He's an extremely energetic boy. Two, my room's destroyed. Posters, records torn off the wall. My bongs and other glass were tilted, but not broken. On my table, my curtains were ripped down. And obviously my first thought is that my brother had let my dog into my room to get back at me for something, and my dog just got anxious and destroyed everything. But the problem with that was A, my brother wasn't home, and B, nothing had bite marks or paw prints or any sign of a dog. And like I said before, posters and things hung on the walls were all over the floor. How could my dog do this? My bongs were on their sides but not shattered. If my dog had really made this mess, They would have been on the floor, broken. C. My door was locked before I left, but somehow unlocked when I returned. At first it looked like it was my dog's doing. It only made sense because it was severe anxiety. But as I explained the details to more of my family, they agreed with me when I said that it was one of our friends, how we used to refer to our house spirits. And they wanted to pin it on my dog for some reason. It's years later and I'm still trying to make sense of it and figure out which one of them it could have been. I've had a couple other experiences in that room in particular, but that was one of the most intense. Shortly after that incident, we blessed the house, moved away, and my older sister moved in with her family. She now has my old room. What I'm about to write about has been spotted in my old house on multiple occasions by two other people than myself. Coincidence or not, here's my little story of what we've seen. The first encounter. I was pretty young, I'd say about 8 to 10 years old. The upstairs of my old house has 3 rooms, all with open doors. It goes bathroom, our bedroom, my sister and I, and my parents' room. The first time I seen this shadow figure was when I was brushing my teeth in our bathroom. I remember seeing this figure perform a trust fall, basically falling backwards with its arms spread into my mom's bed. I witnessed this out of the corner of my eye, or my peripheral vision. I was scared at first, but I brushed it off to just be my imagination. I've seen this figure a few more times, and decided to tell my parents about it. Of course, they didn't believe me, so I decided to just tell myself it was nothing until the next time I see it. This time my sister was with me. Second encounter. So it was late at night. My parents were at the New Year's party, I believe, and my sister and I were home alone. She's 8 years older than me, so she was babysitting, you could say. The downstairs rooms in order were our living room, secondary living room, and our kitchen with a big archway. My sister and I in the kitchen was making sandwiches, and again, through my peripheral vision, I seen this figure sitting on the couch. I tell my sister about it and tell her to slowly back up and don't look right at it. I knew from previous experience it disappeared when looked at straight on. She did as I said and freaked out a little bit. She also seen it sitting on the couch. However, she said it had wings. I didn't see that part. I was just so thrilled somebody else had witnessed it with me. This kind of got me scared and excited at the same time, because I was no longer the only one. Third encounter. Now, I kept this a family secret. I didn't go around telling anybody because I didn't want to sound crazy. That being said, my buddy used to come over a lot and sleep over. We didn't have a spare bed, so we would take a bunch of blankets and lay them out on the living room floor. We would watch movies and eat snacks and just do goofy shit that preteens would do. My sister sometimes accompanied us, and this time she was there. I remember my friend and I pillow fighting when he just stops and drops the pillow. I took the swing and hit him in the head, but he just sat there with a frightened look on his face. I thought I got him good, but then he told me that he'd seen somebody in the other room. I asked him to describe what he'd seen, and he told me it was a man in all black, just like the shadow figure we've been seeing. I took this as confirmation that it may not have been all in my head anymore. Years later, I found out that my mom got the bed from her friend. It was her friend's father's who passed away in that same bed. Could all just be a coincidence, but I'll never forget what I saw. To this day, I'm still skeptical of the paranormal because I've yet to experience anything as an adult. But I keep looking forward to it, as crazy as that sounds. I've been hearing voices and different things in my home for about a month now. At first, I thought I was just sleep deprived. I worked night shifts as a nurse, or that my boyfriend was messing with me, but now I'm starting to get really freaked out. I'll try to explain things the best I know how. A little background. My boyfriend and I rent his grandma's house and live here with our big 3 dogs that bark at everything. The dogs will be important in a second, so just hang on. His grandma used to live there too, but she moved out last year, so it's just us 2 and the dogs. His grandpa died 2 years ago, and his ashes are spread in the garden and the backyard. My mum died 4 years ago, and we have her ashes in a box on our mantel above the fireplace. His brother died this year in January, a mile up the road after leaving our house. Our house is in a small neighbourhood that only has one street, and it's considered the country. But they're doing construction on the main road right by our house to build up the area, so it's not really the country anymore. The first time I can remember really hearing something that stood out to me was about a month ago. I was cleaning the house in the middle of the day while my boyfriend was at work. I usually play music pretty loud when I clean, but the dog started barking, so I walked out to the living room to tell them to hush, and they're all staring at one of our guest rooms. The door was closed and we never go in there for anything. It's barely a guest room, it's more of a place we keep random things that we can't find a place for. I walk in there and don't see anything, so just go back to cleaning. A little bit later, I hear a voice say, "Hi friend." I immediately freeze and walk into the living room and look around. I don't see anybody and the windows were all closed in the house. I text my boyfriend and ask if he just talked to me through a camera we've set up on our mantel. You can talk through an app and we sometimes use it to talk to our dogs when we're not home. And he said he didn't. And I look and our camera is unplugged. Then tonight I'm home by myself and my boyfriend is at a friend's house. I'm feeding the dogs and taking the trash out, just clearing up. I hear a whistle and then someone say hi. All the dogs' ears perked up and their heads all turn in the same direction. I text my boyfriend and tell him, and he tells me to get the dogs and go to our room and grab our shotgun and just wait for him to get home. He gets home and checks the whole house and backyard and doesn't see anything or anyone. There have been a few other things, but those are the two big ones that have made me truly scared where I go and sit in our room and wait for him to get home. So I'm laying in bed right now, and my cat was sat on the windowsill. I was playing on my phone, like I am now, and I heard someone walk past my bedroom door, but I thought nothing of it, as it's an old building, and sometimes it sounds like people are walking around, shuffling, even creaking, even though the hallway is carpet. Well, anyway, like I said, my concentration was on my phone when I heard someone whisper something I couldn't make out, and then a few pss noises you make to a cat when you want them to come to you. I looked towards the window and noticed it was closed, so the noise did not come from outside. My cat jumped straight off the windowsill and dived straight onto the bed and climbed on me, but staring at the doorway next to the bed. I was unable to get her attention by stroking her or saying her name. She was just fixated with the doorway. There is a spooky part of the hallway that is always darker than the other parts near the bathroom door, where I feel like I'm being watched when I either go to or from the bathroom. Then I feel as if I'm being followed back to the bedroom. Once I saw a head peek around the bedroom door, but quickly disappeared when I took a look. No strange encounters happen in my bedroom, just the hallway. Also, sitting in the living room, you can see into the kitchen and out of the corner of our eyes. Both me and my partner have said it looks like someone walks past. Our cat is mainly chilled out, but sometimes goes absolutely bonkers, running around the flat, bouncing off the walls, as if she's being chased. It's a very old town I live in, with a lot of buildings dating back to the 1800s, maybe earlier. The downstairs used to be a shop. I don't know what shop, but it used to be, because the outside looks exactly like the other shops on the road, but ours has been redesigned to be a 5 flats. We have a little gated community, with all the front doors round the back. It's in England, Cheshire. I've been having a few strange dreams at the moment, and my partner keeps having dreams of her friend that passed away 3 years ago. I've tried to look online about the history of the street we live on, but I found nothing. Same with the building. The clock just hit midnight, and I don't think I'll be able to sleep tonight with what happened. I'm normally pretty skeptical, but I just feel like this isn't something I can debunk, and I need to know what to do to feel more safe, because I think the spirit here isn't friendly. I think it's all related to the apartment I currently live in, because I've never had paranormal stuff happen to me before. Thankfully, I'm moving out in a month. I've been living here for 2 years now. The first red flag, the only thing the previous owners left me was a Ouija board. hidden in our bedroom closet. When I found it, I had bad vibes and had to put it on my balcony so it was outside the place. After that, I felt watched at night and had trouble sleeping. Then things got back to normal, until the last few weeks. First, I was all alone doing some cleaning, and the light bulb in my kitchen completely exploded, leaving shattered glass all over the floor. Right after, there was a big bang on my fridge, like someone just hit it. Then I thought I heard something like a faucet running in my bedroom. I was already scared, so I walked super slowly to it. And then my bedroom door, right next to the bathroom, slammed itself, making an awfully loud sound. I was terrified and went to my mom's house for the rest of the day. I tried to tell myself it was just a shortcut, maybe a breeze from the open window that made the noise, but it wasn't even windy. It doesn't make sense. I've had trouble sleeping. Random objects found on the floor, and I blamed it on my cat. Until last week, I heard something wiggling an object and throwing it on the floor. I said my cat's name out loud to ground her, before I realized she was right next to me. And then, 2 days ago, my long mirror fell on my bed. It didn't break. It's a pretty lightweight mirror, that I just lean on my bedroom's wall. I found it weird, but also it could have been the wind. But what just happened tells me it wasn't a coincidence. I was watching a horror movie for the first time in months tonight. I was really, really scared. All the lights were off. During the middle of the movie, I saw what looked like a shadow in my living room mirror. I brushed it off because I'm just too anxious. And then, boom. Before the end of the movie, the living room mirror that's been hanging there for 2 years decides to fall off. No open windows, no nothing. I'm surprised it didn't break, honestly. It was a pretty big fall. On top of that, my cat's freaking out and staring at some stuff I don't see. I'm so uneasy. I heard mirrors were like portals, so I took the two that fell and I hid them, facing the floor. I don't have sage to clear out the energy. What do I do to make this thing go away? To be safe? I know I only have a month left, but still. My name's Zach, and I don't believe in ghosts. But my experience in this place still remains in my head, and I just can't explain what I've seen, felt, heard. When my mother was with her ex-boyfriend, he bought a house and we moved in. It was a yellow house, built in 1970 in Saint-Étienne, countryside, but not that far from Paris. The last owners were probably an old couple. I never knew, probably because I never asked. It was in 2011. I've spent 3 years living there before my stepfather and mom broke up and left for my student life. Among the strange events that occurred, I remember the reversed cross on the ceiling in the garage. Every time we fixed a ceiling due to humidity, the shape always came back at the same place. My cat used to freak out right under the cross and yelled like he was in pain. I assumed it was pure coincidence. One night, my family wasn't there and a friend of mine slept over. I had to pick something in my mother's bedroom and felt observed. My mum used to say she hated her bedroom because she confessed how she woke up sometimes, thinking there was somebody next to her. Not my stepfather. Chills. When I came back in my room, my friend was scared as hell. Her face was blank and she told me she saw something by the window. My theory was, it was a bird, probably an owl. Anyway, the creepy feeling was mutual. One of the craziest episodes was a party. We talked with 2 friends near a door and mirrors. There was this Buddha statue. We were calm, no drugs. Then all the mirrors fell and the head of the statue had been sliced. The rest of the body was still standing. Everybody was choked and asked us what happened. Maybe it was a temperature problem, but it was just a regular April night and I don't remember any weird weather issues. And there's this story about the frickin' TV. We changed our TV over and over again. The screen used to activate itself and change channels, even when we were watching something. Some technicians explained it was something they could not fix easily, since the system was a bit old. Did I mention the mirror in the bathroom? I know, right? It's so cliche. I never seen ghosts in the mirror, but it was always dirty, even if we cleaned it daily. Reminds me of the cross stuff. Anyway, I live in my own flat with my fiance now, and it's a cool atmosphere here. But sometimes I remember about some nights in this yellow house. Ghosts or not, there was something that definitely haunts me now, in my memories. When I was about 4 years old, I had a bunk bed in my room. I wasn't allowed to sleep on the top bunk in case I fell and got hurt at night. However, I was permitted to play up there during the day. I remember climbing up the ladder and being picked up and set on the ground. It felt like a woman's hands, smaller and gentle. I lived with my father, and he was the only one in the house. No one was in the room with me, and I had no explanation as to what had happened. As I got older, other odd things would happen. Toys would disappear, then reappear onto my bed, but my father swore he never moved them. As I'd sleep, occasionally I'd feel a hand on my neck or back. Nothing malicious, just a small woman's hand caressing me. It felt distinctly cold. While I wasn't afraid of whatever was doing it, I was too scared to turn around and look. Things continued to go missing and reappear. Jewellery, makeup, earbuds, etc. Except now, they'd be placed into weird spots of the house. In the washing machine, in the fridge, on top of my car. My father didn't move these things, and neither did I, so I kept assuming it was the ghost or spirit. In the past year, things have started to get a little more odd. I'd be sitting on the couch doing my homework, and everything on the table would fall to the ground, almost as if someone shoved it. My father is a witness to this as well. Boxes would just empty themselves without being touched, glasses would fly off the counter and shatter, and things started disappearing and not being returned. My father had a coin necklace he was given by his grandmother. He wore it every day and kept it on his bedside table at night. One morning, it was gone. He looked everywhere and knew he hadn't misplaced it since he always put it in the same spot. At night, when I was alone, I would hear the doors slam around the house. It's an old house and it requires a good shove to open the doors. The TV would turn on out of nowhere and at full volume. I'm starting to fear whatever presence we have in the home. It's not friendly and gentle anymore. It's getting violent, and I'm not sure exactly what to do. For context, I live with my fiance and our 2 cats and 3 dogs. Today, at around 2:30 p.m., I was heading to the bathroom on one side of my house in order to take a shower, while my fiance was on the other side of the house in his bedroom playing video games. For about 10 minutes as I'm in the shower, nothing unusual happens. But as I go to reach for my conditioner, I hear a loud banging on the bathroom door. It lasted for about 3 seconds, but the whole time it was constant and aggressive. I thought it was my fiance trying to mess with me, as none of my dogs were barking, but decided to check anyway by calling his phone before I left the bathroom. I didn't want to be murdered. I called twice but he didn't answer, but I figured I was overreacting anyway. I head to his room and ask him what had happened, and as soon as I walk in, he turns to me and says, "Has anything creepy happened to you today?" I said, "Yeah, why?" And he told me that when I was in the shower, his bedroom door handle began to jiggle, like someone was trying to open it. He thought I was trying to mess with him. He didn't know I was in the shower, so he grabbed the door handle and opened the door really fast while it was still moving to try and scare me. When he opened the door, no one was there. I asked him if he was the one who was at the door, and he said he had been in his room the whole time. This was confirmed by his brother who had been playing Xbox with him at the time. Around 10 minutes later, we were both in his room, and he went to open his bedroom door, and for a few seconds it wouldn't open, as if someone was holding it shut. We're pretty confused about this and have no idea how to rationalize any of the events that just happened. So my boyfriend and I just moved into our new house, and it was our first time living together. We live in a community that was a huge mining community in the 1840s, so haunted houses are no rare thing up here, as so many men died in the copper mines. We have a puppy as well as a cat, so a lot of these experiences I've chalked up to them moving around, but not anymore. When we first got the keys to the house before we moved any furniture in, our puppy would not come into the house. She would refuse to walk in here and would growl and cry whenever we made her come in. We thought it was just because it was a big old empty house, so maybe it was just weird with none of our scents being in there. Fast forward a few weeks and we are fully moved in, and I start to hear things. It started out as footsteps in the hallway upstairs, when no one but my cat was there, but then moved to hearing voices while in the bathroom or in my room. I tried to write a lot of this off, and really did for the most part. After about a week of living here, we started to notice the kitchen cabinets and drawers would be open when we didn't open them. and things in our pantry would get moved around with both of us denying moving anything. Our puppy, 4 months old now, still would bark and growl at nothing, but again we thought she's just a puppy, so nothing too unusual. Our living room is oddly configured and has French doors on one wall, and on the wall perpendicular is a smaller door. Our couch is on the wall with the small door. We leave that door permanently closed because the couch doesn't fit anywhere else. The door will randomly try to open. It opens in, so with the couch, it can't open. Yesterday, when I got home, I noticed our puppy in the downstairs hallway playing with a ball that seemed to be moving on its own. She would set it down and it would almost get pushed for her to go play with. This heavily freaked me out, but I tried not to show that I was scared. Now, this morning, I swear I heard, "Hello?" in an old woman's voice while I was making breakfast. I tried to convince myself it was just the house creaking or something. Fast forward to maybe 20 minutes ago, and our handyman came over to fix our sink, and he tells my boyfriend that his mother died in the house and at the top of the stairs at 87. I'm so freaked out right now because everything I tried to write off probably was actually this woman. What do I do? Should I introduce myself to her and let her know I respect her house and space and we mean no harm? She was playing with the puppy, so I don't think she's malicious at all. Too long don't read. Been seeing some figures, hearing footsteps and voices in new house. Saw a dog playing with nothing. Found out today that our handyman's mother died in this house. I grew up in a very haunted house. The house had four main spirits with me, and my siblings nicknamed the family. They were your typical nuclear family: a mom, dad, young boy, and girl. As a child, I knew that we were not rich, but we weren't poor either. We had a humble upbringing. Both of my parents worked hard to provide for the five of us kids. I always had to share a room with my sisters. Not only that, we even had to share a bed. As we grew older, the three of us girls no longer fit in the bed together comfortably. So my parents got us a bunk bed. We were so excited. It was a red metal frame bunk bed with a full-size bed on the bottom and a twin up top. Me and my older sister fought about who would have to sleep on the bottom with our little sister, and who would get to sleep on the top all alone. It would be closest thing to our room. I really wanted it. I didn't let up and I won. I didn't know it then, but that would be a mistake that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I mentioned before that my parents worked hard to provide for us. During the work week, they would get up at 3 a.m. and be out of the house by 3:30 to leave for work. We were in charge of getting ourselves ready for school. One early morning, I was awakened to a voice that normally would comfort me. I heard a faint la la being called out at the door of my room. It sounded like my mom, but it couldn't be. She was gone. She was at work. Not only that, my mom rarely called me Lala. You see, I'm from a Hispanic household, while my parents didn't really show me much affection. My mom only called me that if I was hurt or if I did something miraculous to make her proud. Once again, I heard Lala being called out. I froze. There was enough daylight in the room, so I mustered up the courage to peek up from under my covers. And at the doorway, there she was, the mom. She was smiling, waving over at me to come. The image of her is forever embedded in my head. She was glowing in a light blue colour. Her smile was sinister. Her wave was slow motion. I couldn't scream. I was in shock. My body instantly went cold. My bed was drenched in sweat. How could this entity mimic my mom? I covered my entire body with a blanket and prayed she would go away, but I kept hearing her call out. When my sisters woke up, I let them know what had just happened. After that experience, we all slept together on the bottom bunk, even though it was crowded. Every so often after that, you could hear our typical mom noises in the house, such as cabinets in the kitchen being shut as if someone were preparing breakfast, the TV being turned on to a favourite programme. One time my dad stayed home sick from work and he claims the mom jumped into bed with him. I was so haunted by this experience that to this day, I can't sleep alone, and I'm a married adult woman with children. I grew up in the 90s in a typical ranch-style home, in the Sonoran Desert. I moved into the house at just 1 year old and lived here all up until I got married and found a place of my own. I had two brothers and two sisters to share the place with, along with both of my parents. The house was huge. I don't recall the actual square footage, as there were rooms that were add-ons which weren't exactly done with proper permits. All this extra room allowed for the house to be split into two sides. The other side was rented out for extra income. To make an extra room for us girl, they put a wall in between of what was once an open concept kitchen and dining room. This is relevant to my paranormal experience in this house. I was in about first grade when I first saw the family. It was summer in Arizona, and if you're from here, you know it's monsoon season. Me and my little sister would love to stay up, sneak into the kitchen to look out the window, and just admire the lighting in rainy weather. It was almost a nightly ritual where we would wait for my parents to go to bed and then make our way to admire those stormy nights. However, one night was different. I was becoming more aware. Unusual things had always happened in the house for as long as I could remember, but that was my normal. I've been here all my life, it's all I've known. I started to get an unsettling feeling, and I begged my little sister for us to go back to bed. She whined a bit, but eventually obliged. We snuck back into our room. My big sister was sound asleep in the middle of the bed, and as we started to get settled, my heart sank at what my eyes saw walk into our room. I was still sitting up when I saw clear as day, in glowing blue luminescent light, a father, mother, boy and girl walk into our room and stand at the foot of my bed. The mother was holding a tray, wearing an apron, as she entered her formal dining room, my present bedroom. They stared back at me and my little sister tilted their head as if they were confused as to why we were there. My body was drenched in sweat. I looked over to my little sister and sure enough she saw the same thing. We screamed for our parents and just like that, they vanished. This was my first of many times seeing an apparition, and coming to realise that the things going on in my house weren't quite normal. According to an older neighbour, she claimed that the father killed his wife and kids and then killed himself in that house. I heard this being older and it correlates with the spirits I saw. My mom told me she used to live in an old house back in the day in Toronto, I think in the 80s if I'm not mistaken. They used to sleep in the same room in two separate beds across from each other. My mom told me that at 3 a.m. there was always a voice calling her name and telling her to come here, and the voices came from under the bed. My mum would get really scared, and my aunt, who claims she can see and feel spirits, would always pretend to be asleep. But unaware, my mum thought she'd never heard the voices. My aunt always heard them, but they would never call her name, only my mum's. They told my grandparents, but my grandparents would never believe them. Until one time my grandfather was home alone in that house, and apparently he was just making himself a snack. When according to my mom, he told her he seen what was calling her name, but he could never describe it. Couldn't even bring it up. He would always be too scared at even the thought of talking about it. Shortly after that, thank God, they decided to move from that house. I always had a hard time believing the story, but my aunt always told me it was real. And I also had a hard time believing my aunt too. Until one day my cousin was in the hospital. He was in ICU, in a bad shape. When I went to visit him, he was supposedly alive, according to the doctor. But my aunt came out of the room, bawling her eyes out. When I asked what was wrong, she told me my cousin had already passed. She'd seen his spirit looking over his body on the hospital bed. The next day, he sadly passed away. And that's when I realised everything my mom told me was true. The way my mom is, till this day, because of what happened, is sad. She's always worried about everybody, always paranoid about the stuff that happened. And once I realised it was true, I can't even imagine what my grandfather seen on that day. My grandfather passed later on when I was in high school and never described what he saw. Sometimes I wish he did, but maybe him not describing it to my mom might have been the best thing. Maybe there's a possibility my mom would have been worse than she is now if he told her what he seen. That's my story and just thought I'd share. For everybody that read this, thanks for taking the time too. 2 years ago, almost to the day, my girlfriend and I were on vacation through New England. We stayed in a beautiful Airbnb in Craftsbury, Vermont for a few nights. The house was quite old. I'm unsure of the date it was built in, but it definitely started with 18 something. We turned in early for our first night there, as we'd done quite a bit of driving that day. I woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee. Being that this place was in the country, and I myself was raised in the country, I often pee outside, particularly on a night like this where the weather is nice and the landscape beautifully illuminated by a nearly full moon. I'm in the backyard doing my business when I notice a woman standing by an outbuilding. Her features are heavily shadowed despite it being such a clear and bright night. What wasn't shadowed was her long white gown billowing in the night breeze. It stood out so much, contrasted against her dark features, that it almost appeared to glow. I rubbed my eyes, half expecting her to be a figment of my imagination, but she was not. She just stood there motionless, other than her gown. I called out to her, "Hello?" I was not met with a response. At this point, I'm absolutely terrified, goosebumps, hair standing up, etc. I once again called out and asked, "Can I help you?" Nothing. After what felt like an eternity of staring at her, waiting for her to speak or move, even vanish into thin air, I retreated back inside and smuggled up next to my girlfriend, like a child who had just had a bad dream. I stayed up for hours contemplating what I saw and somehow found sleep eventually. The next day, I opted to not to tell my girlfriend what I saw. I know she would not have ridiculed me, but I still felt somewhat embarrassed to speak up. Was it all a dream? I must have convinced myself it was, because I never spoke of it for the rest of the trip, or for nearly 2 years after the fact. Recently, my girlfriend and I were watching a paranormal TV show. Again, we are not intrigued, not necessarily avid believers. We got on the topic of ghostly encounters, and I finally began telling her about the experience I just described. As I told the story, her expression changed to a look of dread. She interrupted me before I could finish. She had seen her as well. The second night in the house, she had awoken in the middle of the night, feeling like she was being watched. She sat up in bed, and there, standing in the corner of the room, was the same shadow-faced woman in the white gown. She explained she tried to wake me, but admittedly, I had gotten pretty drunk that night, because I knew it was the only way I was going to sleep with the previous night's events on my mind. I murmured incoherently, but never woke despite her best efforts. When she looked up from trying to wake me up, the woman was gone. She, like me, chalked the whole experience up to a dream, until I brought it up recently. 2 years ago, my wife and I moved in with my dad to keep an eye on him, as he's getting old and his health isn't the greatest. As it turns out, the place is haunted. At first we thought it was haunted by the previous owner's wife, but now we're not so sure. The previous owners had lived there for the last 40 to 50 years, and before them, there was nobody on the property. They were the only ones to live in the home before us. The husband passed away about 4 years ago, and his wife passed about 10 or so years ago. Before we moved in, my dad told me how things would disappear all the time. A month or so before moving in, we visited for the evening. We all sat in the living room, talking and watching TV. Dad said he had a six-pack of beer in the fridge, and how I could have one. A few minutes later, I got a beer. It was in bottles, in a six-pack box. I opened the fridge, pulled a bottle out of the box without so much as touching the box, and shut the door. I went back to my seat and we continued doing our thing. From where I was in the living room, I could see the fridge. My dad could see the whole kitchen and was facing the fridge. Half an hour later, he said he might have one too. So we got up and went to the kitchen to get a beer. While he was in there, he said to me, "You could have put them back in the fridge, they're getting warm." I said, "What?" He repeated himself as he opened the fridge and put the six-pack of beer, sent 2 bottles, back in. I informed him that I hadn't taken it out of the fridge in the first place. Neither of us had even seen or heard the fridge door open or close, yet the beer was sitting on the counter. After we moved in, we experienced that going on all the time. After 2 years, I've lost over half a dozen DVDs. I can't begin to list everything I've gone to look for, only to have it to be gone. Sometimes I find something a while later in a completely different spot, but most of the time we just never see it again. I had to get my Indiana driver's license, which meant I had to take their test. I took a study book home to read upon what they considered to be traffic laws. It was a couple days later, and I still haven't found it. The other day, my dad was home alone and the TV remote, which he keeps on the table next to his chair, was gone. He searched for over an hour, dissecting the bathroom, kitchen, dining room, and living room, but he couldn't find it. Finally, he turned the TV on at the TV and went to make lunch. He turned on the oven and got frozen chicken out the freezer. He opened the bag of chicken and realised he forgot to get the bacon tray out of the oven. So he opened it, and the tray was in the oven with the remote sitting on it. Another thing that happened once to me, my wife and I laid down in bed one night. Our dog jumped on it like she does, and I felt her flop down. When she did, I felt her lay up against my shins, which she also does. My wife told her to move, and I felt her move away from my legs. My wife told her to move again, and I said she did. My wife said she didn't move, and said she had been laying right in between us the whole time. I felt, and she was, nowhere near my shins. What had sat down and leaned up against me? No idea, but I had a hard time sleeping that night. My wife informed me that she feels something sitting down on our bed all the time. Other things that go on here include lights going off and on by themselves, the front door locking itself and me out 5 times, the TV turned on once by itself after I'd turned it off and set the remote down, and we were talking in here all the time. My wife and I sit in our room a lot, and usually I hear my name called from the hallway, and it sounds like my dad. In the beginning, I would respond or go out to talk, only to discover that he hadn't called me, or he was asleep, or he wasn't there at all. Plus, we leave our door cracked open so our cat can come and go happily. From where I sit, I can see the hall and I can easily see when he's in it. My wife has heard her name too as if he called, but not nearly as much as I hear mine. And when we hear our names called, the other of us doesn't hear it. The other day, I clearly heard my wife yell my name, which my dad didn't hear while sitting right next to me. And she said she hadn't, while also having not heard it. And one day my dad, while home alone, heard someone yelling out to the living room from our bedroom, "Who's there?" And he didn't recognise the voice. He checked, and nobody was there. Well, we always thought it was the lady who lived here before. Now, we're not so sure. All 3 of us have seen a black, cloudy mist the size of a person float through here. I've seen it once or twice, my wife has seen it a few times, and Dad has seen it a dozen or more. One time during the day when it was really sunny out and the inside of our place was all lit up, Dad saw it come down the bathroom, moved down the hall into our bedroom, and he said the bedroom went dark as if it were night out. My wife once woke me up and saw it above her and then disappeared up into the ceiling. The property we live on is 62 acres and used to be a play lake and campground. Over the years, many people came through and it was loved by everyone. The owner retired and closed the lake like 10 years or so ago. My dad, who has known the owner since he was a child, lived in a camper a few years before moving into the trailer and where we all live now. While we lived in the camper, Dad would often go sit outside at a picnic table and read. Right next to him was an old metal fishing shelter, and behind him was the gravel parking lot. One night he was shocked when a man walked toward the shelter and said hi to him. Dad said hi back, and the man asked some questions, mostly about the old people who owned the place. Dad said they went home if they would like to go up and talk to them, but he said no. He had to be somewhere and walked back around the shelter. My dad said he never heard a car come or go, so he wasn't sure where the guy came from or went to. We're in the country and there's nothing around us. If he had come from a neighbour's house and walked, it would have been very dark, especially if he came from the way he seemed to. It's all woods that way. My dad mentioned the man to the owners, who had incredible memories and knew everyone who ever came there to fish. They had no idea who he was. Months later, the man returned, the same way and at night. They spoke again, only this time when the man left, the same way as he had last time, my dad followed. When Dad got around the shelter, he saw nobody. After the lake closed, Dad wasn't the only one renting a camper from the owner, and all 3 of the renters, Dad included, would regularly hear cars running right next to their campers, or car doors shutting, yet no cars would ever be seen. That still goes on. Me or Dad are regularly going out at night to see if people are trespassing. Many have seen UFOs out there, and in all areas around there. A few times I was outside at night and heard breathing, growling, or footsteps that all sounded like an animal, particularly a dog of some kind. But when I went to check it out, I'd find nothing. Once I heard a cow moo, and another time I heard what I could only figure out was a goose. Though I'm really not sure what I've heard the sound before. And they both sound as if they came from the field in front of our place. Maybe a goose had been there, but it was highly more unlikely a cow was. One day I was outside and heard our cat meowing in front of our room inside. His litter box is in there, and when I take the dog out, the cat has separation anxiety from the dog. Cute, right? And we'll go into that room, climb up on my wife's desk, and look out the window at me. On this particular day, I heard him meowing and thought nothing of it, until I heard 4 or 5 very heavy footsteps walking rapidly into that room. Honestly, it didn't even sound like our floor making that noise. It sounded heavier, deeper. When the footsteps stopped, I heard my cat meow like I had never heard him meow before or since. I can't explain the sound, but honestly, it sounded like he were responding to whatever had gone in there without him. A moment later, I heard what sounded like my cat tearing out the room, and then I heard him meowing like he normally does, but from the front door. Back in the 70s, while my mom and aunt were dealing with my aunt's ex-boyfriend, my dad was dealing with something else entirely. He met a woman who told him about a friend of hers who had parties at her house all the time in Raymond. So we went. The friend, Chris, had lost her abusive husband when he passed, from what my dad doesn't know. Since he had never let her out of the house or have friends, when he died, she decided to start having parties and everyone was welcome. She would always cook large meals, feed everyone, and then they'd drink, smoke pot, listen to music, and party. His son Earl came home from the service, I think the Navy, and he brought home a bunch of drugs that he'd stashed while serving. Earl was a big guy, 6'6", 300 pounds. He had a lisp when he spoke and had sinus problems. The coke probably didn't help with that. One night everyone partied and someone passed out, my dad included. Most were in the living room. Dad woke up and saw the living room full of smoke and thought the house was on fire. Before he could do anything, the smoke was gone, and he noticed the sheet that was hung up in the doorway to the hallway was laying up on the ceiling, and Earl was just beyond it in the living room with his arms up, his hands touching the ceiling. Dad looked down and saw his feet were off the floor. He had blood all over his face. Dad said several others were staring at Earl and freaking out, and Earl fell to the floor while the sheet fell back to its hanging position in the doorway. Earl told him that he had gone and passed out in the bed his dad had died in. He was awakened, heard a voice that sounded like his dad say, "There will be no more drugs in my house." And then he was hit hard in the nose, which shattered it. He also said he had floated all the way down the hall to the living room. Some people rushed to him to hospital. Later, the doctor told them that if he'd been hit any harder, his nose would have been pushed into his brain and killed him. My dad hung around with Earl's younger brother and searched the house for someone who might have come in and done that, but all they found was a metal bar laying on the floor next to the bed. I don't think Earl stopped doing drugs. I'm not sure, but the incident actually fixed his sinus problems and his lisp. Many things happened in and around the house, spiritually and otherworldly. The house was an old country house and had no indoor bathroom. There was an outhouse back behind the house. Dad said at night while partying, the guys would just go out on the side of the house to pee, while the women would squat or whatever. One night, Chris went out to use the bathroom and came back in, hysterical. She said she made it halfway to the outhouse when a bright light lit up everything around her from above, and she began floating up in the air. She grabbed a hold of the clothesline and said if it hadn't been for that, she wasn't sure where she'd be. It continued pulling her upward for a minute and then gave up. The light disappeared and she fell to the ground. Another night, some drunk guy talked my drunk dad into taking a drive to a cemetery. For whatever dumb drunken reason, they decided to steal a bunch of tiny flags that had been placed on vets' graves. They came across a broken headstone that was laying in the grass and picked it up with the intent to set it back upon the piece that it broke off from. But when they got it picked up, the guy said to my dad that they should take it, so they did. When they got it back to Chris's house, they leaned it up against the side of the garage and forgot about it. Later, Chris went outside to use the bathroom. It was storming out. A flash of lightning lit everything up, and Chris screamed, then ran back into the house. She said when it flashed, she saw a man standing out there looking at her. She said his face was all scarred up. The guys went outside looking for him but found nobody. A while later, Dad went out to pee along the side of the house. He saw a shadow on the side of the house come up next to his, and he said hi, but got no response. So we looked around and saw the man standing there, scars on his face. They returned the headstone and the guy never came back. They went down the road after that to a local pizza place bar and found a guy there they knew and told him about it. He turned white, then told them about a guy who had left the bar, drove up the road, and crashed his car right in front of that cemetery and burned to death in his car. It was that guy. In 2008, I had to move and my girlfriend, my wife now, needed a place to live. So 3 months after we started dating, we were moving into a place together. It was a very small, one-bedroom ranch house with a basement in Silverton, Ohio. It was an older house that was designed strangely, had questionable features, and never felt welcoming. After a short time, things started going on there. Luckily nothing too crazy, but here's what went down. The basement was very creepy, and I'm not really creeped out that easily. But when I went down there, I felt as if I was being watched. And if I didn't have to go there to do laundry, I would have never gone. The air also felt a little thick down there all the time. When letting my dogs outside, they would always stop at that door and stare at it. And every now and then there would be a bang from down there, and we would hear upstairs what sounded like a trap door being released when someone was hung at the gallows. I never discovered what made that sound. The blind in the only kitchen window was the kind that rolled down and you had to tug on it to get it to roll up, except it never wanted to work for us. If we got it down, we could almost never get it rolled up, though sometimes it would just roll up on its own. I don't necessarily think that was paranormal, but who knows? Lastly, in the living room, the ceiling was like 10 feet up or higher, and there was a light on it that was operated by a pull string. It was a chain at the light and for a couple feet down, but there was a string tied to the chain that hung down further so it could be reached. When you used it to turn the light on or off, it made that familiar sound of the chain rubbing against the side of the hole, and then the click. We heard the chain rubbing all the time with no click, and the light never turned on or off by itself, but we gathered that whatever was pulling the string wasn't strong enough to get it to click. However, we did catch the string swaying after hearing the noise many times. In fact, one day I was sitting on the couch talking to my friend on the phone, and I just happened to look up at the string a second before it was pulled, and I saw it happen. It made the noise, and the string bounced up when it was let go of, and swung around like it always did. We moved after 8 months there, and I was happy to go. Not because of what went on, hauntings don't bother me like that, but because of how I felt in the house. Not really evil, but not good, either. Ever since my family moved into our current house, my room has always been off. Always the opposite temperature from the rest of the house. Things going missing and reappearing in places I'm absolutely sure I would never put them. Just to name a few. When I was 15, I was up at around 11 PM since I couldn't just fall asleep. And I think I saw someone or something standing by my closet closed door. Now, I didn't feel scared. If anything, it was oddly comforting, as if I had nothing to worry about. I didn't say anything to my parents because, as a teenager, do you really think that they believed me if it said there was something going on in there? Of course not. A few months of sporadically seeing the figure during the night, she disappeared, and my room was sort of stabilizing in temperature, and I can remember explicitly that I felt so relieved in the winter when my room was actually warm and not freezing cold, as it had been for the past year or so. Then, when I turned 17, my room's temperature went wonky again for a few days, and then I saw the figure again, still by my closet door even after I had moved some stuff around my room. It was also 11 again, as had happened the other times I saw the figure, and I again felt the same peace that I'd felt the other times. However, this time, it only stayed for 1 week, of which all 7 days she was there in front of my closet door. I had almost felt a little upset, thinking that maybe I'd done something to bother the figure, but eventually, thinking about my future career, dismissed what had occurred from my mind until today. Now, I turned 18 recently, and the happenings that had occurred in the past just came back to me without reason, and I commented about this to my friend, and they noticed how weirded out and uncomfortable I was with the thought of something being in my room. And she suggested that I use the TikTok filters that witches on the app that have been using to detect their deities or what they worship. And though I thought it was most likely just a glitch that could occur, but there's always a chance it could actually be true, I still did it because, again, I wasn't comfortable not knowing. So I got the app and I quickly tested the filters before I started going around my room, not seeing anything in the living room or kitchen, which was kind of comforting, but I still had to go test my room. I enter my room and turn on the filter, starting to look at the furthest area of the room and seeing nothing. Scanning around, and as soon as I turned the phone to the closet, the filter quickly worked, showing something moving in front of the door. I thought to myself, no, it must be the movement from the phone that made something appear to be there. So I switched filters and switched back with very little movement of the phone, and there was still something there. Now, normally I wouldn't believe that an app meant for entertainment purposes can show something paranormal in nature, but my wallet and textbook were on my higher shelf that I never move stuff on or off, and underneath my desk, respectively. So, is there a possibility that my room is haunted?